Hi, everyone, and welcome to Trade and Tariff Tuesdays. We're back with another edition of Avalara's webinar series discussing the Trump administration's tariffs and their impact on trade compliance. My name is Ashley, and I'll be your host. Before we start, I just have a couple housekeeping items. First off, a friendly reminder that Avalara cannot provide legal or tax advice. On your screen is our safe harbor policy. Please take a moment to review that. We are recording today's event, so if you want to listen to the recording, you'll receive it later today. The console you're looking at can be customized. Feel free to move or resize the windows. The additional resources section contains a lot of great related resources, including today's slide deck. There are several ways to engage with presenters and fellow attendees today. First, if you have any questions, you can submit them using the Ask a Question box. We will save time at the end for Q&A. You can also submit troubleshooting questions there. Second, you can join our attendee group chat. You'll click the icon at the bottom of your screen with the little chat bubbles, and it will pop up on your screen. We encourage you all to introduce yourself, network, and discuss today's topic. Third, you can react to the presentation by clicking the emoji icon and reacting. Lastly, a reminder that this webinar is designed to be quick, and we're just scheduled for 30 minutes and interactive, so therefore it is not eligible for CPE credit. All right, let's meet today's presenters. We are joined by three Avalara team members. First off, we have Craig Reed, General Manager Cross-Border, Shane Bogdan, Director of Sales Cross-Border, and Patrick Frith, Senior Director of Growth Cross-Border. And then answering some questions in the chat, we have George Trantis, Senior Director of Global Marketplaces. So thank you all for being here. That's all I have for housekeeping, so I will pass it over.
Perfect. Thanks, Ashley. And for those of you attending, another warm welcome to our weekly webinar series. We continue to gain more new followers week over week. We're glad that we're seeing the feedback come in that these are valuable today. We are going to go through our normal cadence that we have. We've updated our timeline a little bit to synthesize based upon some of the actions over the past 5 weeks. We do want to do a quick call out here that, April 2nd, I think everybody has seen recently in the news that is now being coined Liberation Day, America. This is going to be all about the reciprocal tariffs that are coming into play. So we have our normal cadence next week on April 1st, Tuesday. We're also now going to have one kind of a special edition on Thursday, on April 3rd, going over kind of the meat or what has been publicly announced to the world on April 2nd, and kind of do a short program on that on the 3rd there, on Thursday the 3rd. So more to come on that. Today will be a synthesis of the past 6 weeks, but we'll get it kickstarted like we normally do with a question to the audience here. What bipartisan request was urged to Congress in 2024 regarding cross-border trade, which remains relevant in 2025? So let the team open it up. But Craig and Patrick, good to see you guys as always.
Yeah, there's, as always, lots to talk about. There's going to be a lot to talk about next week, that's for sure. So it's interesting to me that on March 4th, which was the day that the Canadian tariffs were introduced, we were all in Canada, in Toronto, doing our team meeting. And now the day the rest of the world tariffs are going in, Patrick and I are going to be in Amsterdam. So we'll be attending an event in Amsterdam. So we'll be doing our special event from Amsterdam. So it should be an interesting week, that's for sure.
Yeah, truly.
This week seems like the storm, the calm before the storm, Shane.
Yeah, absolutely. So, all right, everyone. Well, let's just go and see here. So, if you're following along to the news, obviously 80% here. Option B here is grant U.S. Customs and Border Protection Authority to demand more documentation. So this has really been a bipartisan topic for really over a year now, with several bills in front of the House getting reviewed, et cetera. But this is really coming into play in relation to the whole de minimis piece in terms of the documentation needed, the proposed documentation, HS classifications, other forms of clearance for these parcels coming into the U.S. For those of you who haven't been on and need a refresher on de minimis exemption allows for one shipment of good, one per person per day, valued at or under $800 to enter the U.S. Duty-free. And again, this has been a hot topic since over the past year, really. And to put it into perspective, In 2024, CBP reported there was 1.36 billion parcels in 2024 that were entering the U.S. that were under de minimis. If you were on these previous things, you would have seen what it was back in 2015, which was 125 million parcels de minimis entering the United States. So 125 million in 2015, all the way up to 1.36 billion in 2024. So clearly, the U.S. is trying to figure out a way of how do we capture this information. And this is a very bipartisan effort here. So
also, vast majority from China too, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I believe 60% or so is the latest stat on those parcels coming into the U.S. under de minimis.
So let's just kind of review, why the whiplash. We call it tariff whiplash. The original announcement was under an emergency order that to stop the flow of fentanyl and illegal immigrants, that there would be some impact to trading partners like Mexico, Canada, and China, specifically to stem the flow of fentanyl and illegal migrants. So that was we'll go through the timeline, but that was the original impetus of it. And that resulted in the original kickoffs of the tariffs. There's subsequently been other reasons that have been stated for why the tariffs. We won't go through all that, but I think, it's just helpful to kind of review the original impact or the original impetus, and then just go through the timeline and just review where we're at. So Shane, you want to take us through the timeline?
Absolutely. And for those of you who have been joining us, again, we're trying to synthesize today down a little bit more, obviously next week being the big piece. But this all really got kickstarted on that first date there, February 1st. This was really the major announcement that tariffs were set to go live on February 4th, impacting Canada, Mexico, and China. So 25% tariffs on Mexico and Canada, and then 10% tariffs on China. This also brought into the perspective of de minimis, which I was just referring to in those previous House bills here. February 3rd happens, wild day, retaliatory tariffs issued by Canada on U.S. imports. By the afternoon, Mexico and Canada tariffs were delayed for negotiations until March 4th. Both of those countries offered concessions to focus on border enforcement and additional fentanyl control that was a stemming factor that Craig mentioned too before. February 7th. So again, interesting day just because of the whole de minimis piece. For those of you following it, what we've been saying on the call here, basically the White House reinstated de minimis, as they said that it will be reinstated until adequate systems are in place to fully and expediently process and collect tariff revenue. So basically what this is saying is that, due to the volume that's been coming through, that when they removed the de minimis, there's just not adequate systems in place in order to capture all that. And this has been a main talking point over the past few years on the efficiency of how will we actually capture, process all of these parcels that are coming through under the de minimis. Now, what we're seeing on our side is it's going to be we believe it's going to be inevitable that there are going to be changes around de minimis, whether that be reduced, removed, or most likely de minimis parcels requiring additional pieces of information like HS10s, country of origin, other pieces of information on those parcels coming in. This is most likely inevitable due to these bills, due to the adequate systems that they're looking to come into play here. So on April 10th, this is when the 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum were announced. So all previous steel and aluminum provisions were revoked. On February 13th here, this was really the first date that they had mentioned this whole piece of April and these reciprocal tariffs going to come into play across the globe here. So that February 13th was the initial kind of gunshot out there that something else was going to be coming. We go into this slide, we go into the February 18th here, proposed tariffs on auto and pharma. Again, more reinforcement on the April announcements on reciprocals. March 4th, China was additional 20%. So the White House increased China tariffs by another 20%. But what's key here is March 4th, as Craig mentioned also previously, was we were all up in Canada together at this time on our Canadian and our cross-border on-site. March 4th was the date of which the February 4th date for the 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico were punted from February 7th. So what happened on March 4th, these tariffs go back into play. Again, it was pretty chaotic. We were in Canada. A hot topic across all the news channels were specifically on this piece. Within 48 hours later, on February 7th, these tariffs were then put on pause. And it wasn't put on pause on everything, but it was really went under the provisions of that. Anything under a USMCA agreement would be on pause of that 25%. So if you have a good, though, that is not qualifying is not qualified for USMCA, it would receive that 25%. So, we talked about this last week as well in some of these other webinars. The USMCA perspective is goods must originate from the US, Mexico, or Canada, or be substantially transformed within those countries in order to qualify for USMCA. And then to put it in perspective on, how many goods coming over into the US from Canada are USMCA eligible, as well as Mexico. Well, 50% of goods from Mexico to the US are USMCA eligible, and then only 38% of goods from Canada to the US are USMCA eligible. So really, although this was punted, a majority of the goods here are still being tacked on this 25% tariff. On March 10th, on March 12th here was the date that it all went into play in terms of the steel and aluminum tariffs that were on here. And then there was also the Ontario electric tariff as well. So basically, Ontario issues a 25% electricity tariff on Minnesota, Michigan, and New York, impacting 1.5 million Americans. Then on March 13th, phase 2 of Canada's reciprocal tariffs on the US were announced. So basically, Canada announced additional 25% tariffs on close to $30 billion worth of US goods, steel products, aluminum products, other goods that was worth $14 billion, computers, sports equipment, et cetera. And then the latest piece that we've added on here was yesterday. The announcement came out that basically President Trump had said that 25% tariff on all countries that buy oil and gas from Venezuela are set to take place again on this April 2nd date. The EU also said that they were going to start delaying retaliatory tariffs until mid-April until they find out what is happening on April 2nd. But I think the key piece here is this Venezuela one. There's a lot of lack of clarity around how this is all going to play out.
I'm not sure exactly who decide who's oil from Venezuela, but that remains to be seen.
Yes.
So just to kind of summarize for everyone, we kind of ran through that. All the timeline, let's just kind of go through where we're at as it stands today. So just working from left to right, China's at 20%. So an additional 20% is placed on China in punitive tariffs. They have retaliated with 15% on energy products and 10% on crude oil and some agricultural products. Canada is at 25%, as Shane mentioned, except for USMCA. So anything that qualifies for USMCA is tariff exempt. So that's about, again, 38% of goods. For Mexico, they're in the same boat. 25% of the 25% tariffs on anything that isn't USMCA. And then across the board for everyone is the 25% on steel and aluminum articles from most countries. And then, April 2nd, we've heard varying news reports. I was reading reports yesterday, and in fact, the market took a bit of a bump up on news that the tariffs would be more targeted and more limited than folks were expecting. But, given the uncertainty and all the stuff that's happened to date, we really don't know. So until April 2nd comes around, it's anyone's guess exactly what that's going to look like. But we'll be here to report on it.
Just to add, Craig, we get a lot of questions. Are my goods in the USMCA agreement? Are they not? As you mentioned, 38% of goods are. The only way, and the answer to that question is, the only way you can know that is if you know the HS codes of your goods, because that is exactly how the USMCA list is put together. It's based on HS codes, not on product description, not on where it was manufactured. It's based on the HS codes. So you really do have to know the HS codes of all your products to know which are exempt and which are not.
Yeah, and there's a lot. I see a lot of questions about products with portions of aluminum and steel and how that might apply to the finished good and what that means. We're probably not going to get to all of your questions, so my suggestion would be to reach out to us. There's going to be instructions following the end of the webinar. We can get you in touch with somebody who can answer your questions for you. Anyway, let's keep going ahead here. A lot of material to cover. Oh, I should. Yeah, thank you. One of the things we're interested in is just so we can continue to target these webinars a little more effectively is how you're thinking about this. Are you worried about your supply side? So in other words, where you're importing goods from other countries that may be affected by tariffs, or your exports, so your sales to other countries, or both equally. So if you could just take a moment to answer that, that'll help us make sure that we gear the content a little more effectively as we move forward. And we are very interested in how you folks are thinking about this.
Yeah, I'm curious. Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, there's a couple questions that came in I think are perfect for this time here. So we have two people, Linda and Connor, both asked a question. They shipped goods on or about March 5th. They missed the deadline. They both got assessed 25% additional duties. Is there any way to reclaim that?
From my knowledge, no, and I know this has been a hot topic, that they were not going to allow for duty drawback on those goods.
Yeah, that's my understanding as well.
And then one other quick one. Is there a link to look up the HS tariff impact?
Well, you could go into the legislation around USMCA, and deep in that document, they will have listed the HS codes, which are impacted, which are included and which are not. However, it's meaningless if you don't know the HS codes of your products. If you know them, then great, you can cross-reference. If you don't know them, you need to find out what your products are classified as.
Yeah,
so,
and also,
of course.
The other thing that's important is you need to make sure you understand your country of origin and understand that there are rules of origin that govern what your country of origin is, and if you follow those rules correctly. Well, we should go to the. Well, this is great actually. So it's pretty balanced. More on the import and supply side, less strictly on the export side, obviously, or both equally. So I think it's tilted, and this is pretty consistent with what we've seen in other webinars, where it's tilted a little bit more towards the import side, and then a lot of folks who are worried about both sides of the equation. So that's interesting. So thanks for answering that for us, folks. All right, let's keep moving here. Did we lose our slide? There we go. Oh, I think we went one too far. All right, we're having some technical difficulty. Oh, there we go. So we thought it'd just be interesting to talk a bit about, there's some follow-on or knock-on impacts of these tariffs, and one of the great examples is Canadian liquor situation. I'm Canadian. I live in a suburb of Toronto, and if you walk into a government liquor store, we have government liquor stores. There are all of the American products have been pulled off the shelves. So, whether you agree with it or disagree with it, it is a follow-on impact. And similarly, there's been reports that trips to the United States, the customs hall at Pearson Airport in Toronto is empty. So there's a lot of knock-on effects with tourism, purchasing of alcohol, purchasing of other products that are, really going to have an impact on the rest of the industries in different industries specifically. So, it's not just limited to goods.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing here is too, Craig, is just kind of how this is impacting earnings and the way U.S. supply providers are seeing this is that, okay, yeah, it's going to be increased by 25%, but what's worse than 25% is that those goods being completely pulled off the shelves. Yeah. And then vying for shelf space across the board there as well. So yeah, I think that's definitely an interesting piece. And I think just going back to the steel and aluminum, because I was looking up this stat, I believe there's about 40% of, the U.S. gets 40% of its aluminum from Canada. I know there's been a lot of recent stories out there in terms of the American brewers currently right now because of obviously canning with aluminum cans and how this impacts them. So again, it's going across the board here in terms of how this is impacting from these variety of tariffs.
Yeah, it's interesting because the reason why aluminum comes from Canada is because the hydroelectric power is very, very cheap, and you need a lot of power to produce aluminum anyway. So it's not easy to replicate, and that's one of the unfortunate things in a trade war.
Okay, so practical implications. Whilst nations slug it out, make decisions, brinksmanship, trade wars and all the rest of it. In the meantime, businesses all over the world are being impacted. So, the questions that we receive all the time is, am I in compliance? Am I keeping up with the changes? How can you help me keep up with the changes? Because I'm experiencing problems. And, right at the top of the list, shipments held up in customs. And this could be a dispute over a duty amount. This could be over a change in the de minimis, which we saw from China, if you remember, for 2 days back in February. Shane took us through that timeline. So the implications of changes catch people off guard. And then subsequently, the practical implication is that the shipment gets delayed in customs, of course, which is no good for anybody. It's very disappointing for the end customer. It can incur fees. We've got that listed down as well. Storage fees, so on and so forth, handling fees. So it just escalates. Penalties and fines. We get a question about that a lot. If I'm not compliant, there are rules. There's legislation in place in all countries, and they will impose penalties and fines. If it's an unintentional, innocent mistake, of course, that might have one conclusion. But if you're a repeat offender and you're out of compliance with goods every single day into another country, cross-border goods into another country, you're either, your classifications, your HS classifications are incorrect, therefore determining a different duty amount could be viewed as evasion. Or your classification is incorrect and you're paying too much duty. Of course, that's not a situation you want to be in. So yes, penalties and fines are real. They exist. They're built into legislation in all countries, and ultimately, they're going to be imposed sooner or later. They're going to be imposed to deter. So under and overcharging duties all stems from HS codes. We talk a lot about HS codes here. Very important. The HS codes of your goods, so you're not paying a penny over or a penny under on duty. You're paying the right amount and you're compliant. And of course, ultimately, delays, increased costs, they all lead to poor customer experience. And in the case of e-com, abandoned carts, which is no good for anybody. So B2C, B2B, equally impacted. The only way you can keep on top of all this is by making sure that you're compliant, your data's clean, you've got your HS codes, your declared values are accurate, and all these issues, these pitfalls can be avoided.
Yeah.
So time for another question. We ask this every week, so we've got a little history on the next slide of how people have answered. So this is around all the changes that are taking place. You're responsible for your supply chain, your customer satisfaction. So what are you planning on doing to adjust your supply chain, given all these changes that are going on with tariffs and regulation and so on? So we've got a few answers there, ranging from diversifying suppliers to rethinking distribution strategies. So we'll give you a moment to read through those answers and select your appropriate answer.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this continues to evolve. I think, a lot of uncertainty originally, but I think, and probably will remain so until April 2nd. But we are seeing some changes in the trends. Why don't we go to the results and then?
Yeah, and I was gonna say, well, I'll ask a question while we're doing this. Does Avalara do a study on products to determine the HS code? It's a great question. I'll let you guys take it from the panel.
Yeah, That's what we do. We make sure that we have the right HS codes for your products. You know, we have a lot of experience, a lot of different tools and services that we can use, different use cases depending on what you need. So if that's a question for you, you can reach out to us. There's I think a contact us toggle at the end of this webinar that you can get in touch with us and we can help you out.
Yep.
Okay, then. So 27.5% are rethinking distribution strategies. So fulfillment center locations, carriers, shipping routes, all that sort of thing. Yeah, that's a strong leader here, because the current distribution strategy is incurring perhaps too much cost because of these changes. So that is a rethink is absolutely necessary. We'll see how this racks up now with our, so this is the history. You can see from the 18th of February through to the 18th of March. So we've got a full month here. So the I don't knows are declining, all right? So people, you can imagine boardroom meetings around the world have happened. Decisions have been made. This is what we're going to do. We don't know what we're going to do right now, but by the end of this meeting, we're going to know what we're going to do. So that's gradually, we expected that. People are beginning to sort of crystallize what they're going to do. And we're seeing an uptick here in diversifying suppliers in outside of China and then switching to local suppliers. So as this evolves, we'll continue to show this as long as it's relevant to see where people are settling. Okay, so where organizations are settling in their decisions. Any other comments, guys?
No, I would just hope that, you know, we do continue to see that, I don't know, continue to go down as further clarity comes out, because obviously we're 6 weeks into this whole piece. This is our 6th webinar. Hopefully businesses, organizations are starting to make moves. Obviously the lack of clarity and kind of the light switch effect of tariffs on, tariffs off are causing some uncertainty before pulling the trigger on these things. But hopefully we'll get some further clarity on April 2nd in terms of what this means for more than 3 weeks.
The paralysis isn't good for anyone, that's for sure.
Nope.
Okay, Shane.
Yeah, so, you know, we mentioned something, we'll go through this quickly, but, you know, somebody had mentioned previously in terms of keeping up to date with duties, taxes, et cetera. Where are the HS classification codes listed? I mean, listen, this is what our team, you know, core competency of our cross-border organization is. We are staying up to speed in terms of what changes are happening. We have a Slack channel that Craig and I are on constantly in terms of any sort of new news piece that may cause any implications to any of our duty and tax rates for cross-border perspective. On February 4th, when these came into play originally, we had those all ready to go. On February 7th, we were able to quickly turn them off. Same thing with March 4th. They turned back on. And then again on March 7th, we're quickly able to adjust as needed here. So, you know, just for the folks on the call here, how we help out, again, this really is a key competency of Avalara is our cross-border services, from calculating duty and taxes, understanding what that applicable tariff rate is and how it impacts you, your end consumer. Tariff code classifications, Patrick, myself, Craig have been mentioning this. This is just such a key piece here in terms of where this impending legislation is going in order to include additional information on parcels being imported and exported. We provide a variety of services here, from self-serve tools to a team of 260 individuals that will actually go through catalogs one by one, classify those goods, and even provide follow-up GRIs, general rules of interpretation, how they got there. And then also trade content restrictions management. Do those HS codes require PGAs? Do they have countervailing duties on those? What is the duty rate affixed to those? So these really are our key pieces here: classifications, calculations, and really trade content across the board.
Yeah, I saw a lot of questions about trade content in the Q&A. So, you know, can't get to all your questions. There's very specific questions about different chapters and so forth. So noted, and maybe in a future webinar, we can kind of go through a bit more of a Q&A with some of those, because there's great themes there. But, you know that we can get those answers for you. And I think this is a question that would help you get those answers, actually. Yeah.
For any of you that have raised your hands previously too, we have a team that is reaching out within I would say a 12-hour period of us getting the results. So if you have questions, let us know. We will get back to you as soon as possible. So I know we're set at time here, but George, any last questions on here that came through?
There's some really good ones. They're probably not enough time to answer them, but I think the Canadian. I'll just leave with this one. Susan asked, the Canadian Department of Finance has created a program for potential remission of tariffs for Canadian businesses that can't reasonably source goods from other vendors outside the U.S. Is there any consideration for a U.S. program? I have not heard anything at this time.
Yeah.
Not that I'm aware of, but it'll be interesting to see what kind of pressure the different industry groups put on the government when it becomes clear that they're not going to be able to get away from these tariffs. So
that was my exact. I was going to write back to Susan is please contact your local senator or congressperson if you're in the U.S. because that is the best way to handle these.
Yeah, that's really what's going to, I think, create some movement is as U.S. industry starts to really raise their hands and say, hey, this is really killing us here. All right, great. Well, we're out of time. Time always flies so fast. There's so much to talk about. We might need to expand the time or reduce the content. But in any event, like we said, we will be back next Tuesday before the reciprocal tariffs go into effect, and then we'll do a follow-on on Thursday after they go into effect. So please join us for those, and thank you for attending once again.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Just a couple things to wrap up today. We do have some great resources for you available in this slide deck, so be sure to check those out. And then, like the presenters mentioned, we do have some upcoming events, so you'll receive a post-event email later today with a link back to this console. You can get the recording, slide deck, and additional resources. And we'll have those upcoming events that you can register for. So we hope to see you back soon. And this concludes today's webinar.